Raise your hands. Anybody in here feel like they're lucky? Maybe you're winning your fantasy football league, or maybe you picked the perfect schools for the March Madness brackets, or maybe you've won money in the lottery. Good, I see some hands up. We call you the lucky few. And I'm lucky too, because I'm a 1%er. No, not the kind that you're thinking of. I'm one of the 1.2% of Americans that are living with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I haven't always thought that I was lucky or that I won the lottery of mental health illness, but I believe that we are the sum total of all of our life experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I truly do not feel that I would be the person that I am today without my long-standing struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder. So who is the person standing here before you today? Well, I'm a wife of nearly 30 years. I have a son who's a Division I football player and a daughter who is ready to set the STEM world on fire. I have 3 college degrees, and I've helped hundreds of children and adults as a speech pathologist since 1994. I counseled thousands of U.S. Army soldiers as they transitioned out of the military into their civilian worlds. And now I work with professional athletes on a variety of skills such as public speaking and building resumes. Now, I have devoted my entire life to helping other people live their best life. All the while, I've been struggling with an insidious mental health disorder. Now, I've done my best to keep my issues secret, and before I announced this TED Talk, less than 10 people in this whole world knew about my 30-year struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, the reason that I'm here tonight is to bring hope to people living in the world of OCD, because you can live a life that's not dominated by OCD. I want you to see the mistakes that I've made so that you don't repeat them. I want people to see that they are stronger than they think they are. And I want you to build your house of brick and defeat the big bad wolf, OCD. Now, research shows that there are 2 phases in life where OCD typically has its onset. The first phase is between the ages of 8 and 12, which is more likely to have a genetic etiology. And the second phase is between the ages of 18 and your early 20s. Now, I'm not sure which group I belong to because I distinctly remember calling my neighbor from the junior high payphone and asking her to please go to my parents' house and check to make sure that my curling iron was off. But regardless of which phase I belong to, the true manifestation of OCD did not occur in my life until I was in my 20s. Now, I knew that I had an issue with checking my curling iron, and it was causing an issue between my fiance and I. Well, this is the deal. Diligent people, intelligent people are diligent and concerned. What if my careless mistake led to the complete destruction of my parents' house or the apartment that I was living in? People could lose everything, get hurt, or even die. Now, as I said, it was an issue between my fiance and I, this extreme fear that I felt about this, and it was a topic during our premarital counseling. And the counselor suggested that we role play and switch behaviors. Now, I could see that what I was doing looked idiotic. So I worked very hard to suppress the urge to check things. And it was in my 20s when I started building my house of straw. Not long after I got my first job out of college as a speech pathologist in a local school district, my job responsibilities would completely overwhelm me. When I started my position, there were 10 speech pathologists in the district that I was in. Then 3 quit. And that left me in an overwhelming situation. All of a sudden, I was a brand new SLP and I had 75 kids on my caseload with diverse needs and diagnoses. My job completely stressed me out. Now, I started to have chest pains, so I just knew that I was having a heart attack. And I went to tell my doctor what was going on. And he said to me, I don't think what you have requires a stress test on your heart. I believe what you're suffering from is anxiety. So he prescribed me this fabulous medication for when my anxiety and fear overtook my mind and my body. Now, I took that medication sparingly because I could handle things on my own. I also saw a couple of mental health professionals, but none of them said anything that made me want to go back. And that's how it is when you're building your house of straw. You want the quick fix. You just want your mind to be right. You're hoping that you can find a medication so you can live life and endure whatever your crazy mind throws your way. And that way you can keep things a secret. No one has to know that you're struggling. Well, as I was working in this stressful position, I started noticing that I was having these odd behaviors. I would use the computer in the school library to write my reports and the printer to print them out and shut them off and then go back to my office. But then I would go back to the library over and over to make sure that I had shut them off. And I'm embarrassed to say that I bothered the librarian and the library aide on countless occasions and asked them to please check and make sure everything was off. Now, I was working in multiple buildings, and this unbeknownst obsession was following me from building to building. And at home, I would pace the floors at night, worried because I could not get into those buildings and check to make sure everything was turned off. In the spring of 1997, my husband and I found out that we were having our first child, and we were so excited. Now, the pregnancy was smooth, and our son was born during halftime of the Orange Bowl on January 2nd, 1998. I loved being a mom, and you know what? I never worried about SIDS or any other childhood disease affecting my son, because he belonged to God and he was a gift that we were blessed with. Now, not long after my first Mother's Day, the big bad wolf, OCD, came and he blew my house of straw into smithereens. And I would never be the same again. Now, in the fall of 1997, I was assigned a student that had significant voice difficulties because of 2 inoperable brain tumors that were in her cerebellum. Now, when she was younger, in her elementary years, she had had radiation therapy. And the radiation therapy had adverse side effects, to include premature onset of puberty, legal blindness, and a very odd inflection and prosody to her voice. Now, there wasn't a lot of research available for me to draw from, but I did the best that I could, and I taped every session. You know, with a tape recorder. Wow. I taped all of our sessions up until I went on maternity leave, and I resumed taping right after I got back from maternity leave. Not long after Mother's Day, the parents told me that they were concerned that the cancer was back again, as evidenced by disintegrating speech patterns. I was shocked. I had not noticed any worsening of her speech. Now, improvement was hard to achieve and measure, but I had been vigilant and I had taped every session. Well, the appointment was set for mid-June, and I was having a hard time concentrating on anything else besides this appointment. I would go to work and complete my work as best as I could, and when I would get done with my work day, I would be at home pacing the floors, analyzing those tapes over and over again. I was in agony. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. It was a horrible feeling. Well, the night of the appointment with the doctors, after discussing their concerns with their doctors at the Children's Hospital where she'd been treated previously, the doctors refused to run a CAT scan. They said that what the parents were seeing were the continued residual effects of radiation therapy. So I was right. I was vindicated, and nobody was going to die due to my ineptitude. It should have been a done deal. It was just a set of judicious parents concerned about the well-being of their child. But I was too far gone. I couldn't turn the obsession off in my head. I ended up quitting my job because I lived in extreme fear of what the next school year would bring for me, what rare case that I would encounter. Now, I later found out that quitting my job was an avoidance behavior demonstrated by many people with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, here's what I'd like to tell you, that about a month after that parent took their child to the doctor, that everything was smooth and I was happy and everything was coming up roses. But here's the truth, because if everything was great after a month, that would make for a very short story. The truth of the matter is, it took me a year to get to the point where I could pick up sticks to build my house of sticks. After about a year, things were going smoothly. My husband was working on building a business out of town. I loved being a mom, and I was feeling pretty good. And God worked in a miraculous fashion, and I got the job of my dreams. I was working for the U.S. military in out processing. I was a career counselor for U.S. Army soldiers as they transitioned out of the military into their civilian world. Now, this job was great. This job allowed me to use my creativity, and it let me do what I love doing the most, which is help people. It was a great setting, and everyone I worked with was retired military, and most of them combat veterans. But I started to become more self-aware, and I could see that some of the things that I were feeling probably weren't right. I was extremely anxious, always worried. I never slept through the night, and I was having a very hard time suppressing the urge to check things. I attributed all of this to anxiety. The thought of it being anything else besides anxiety never crossed my mind. Well, I went to my doctor and I said, is there any relief available for me? Because I do not want my son growing up seeing how I'm acting. My doctor prescribed me this fabulous medication. And when I was on it, I had no worries. In fact, I could be on a life raft in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by sharks, and still remain calm. Now, I think I took this medication a year or two. And it was the best I'd ever felt in my life. When our son was 4 years of age, we decided that we wanted to grow our family, and that meant no meds. So I quit cold turkey. Well, that was a disaster. I started having these lightning zaps go through my head, and I had to go to my doctor and admit what I had done. He worked with me through a treatment program so that I could get over the medications I was taking. And I later found out that medication is rarely prescribed anymore because of the difficulty getting off of it. Now, over the course of the next 2 years, my husband and I had 3 miscarriages. But I thought I handled it pragmatically. Everyone experiences loss. I thought it was our turn statistically. And after the 3rd miscarriage, we found out that I had a very rare blood clotting disorder called antiphospholipid syndrome that only affected me while I was pregnant. Now, the treatment consisted of injecting myself twice daily with heparin. Did I tell you that I hate needles? So I would go to my doctor's office before work when my husband was out of town working, and in the evenings I would have friends help me with my injections. Well, let's just say that the cocktail of pregnancy hormones and my still undiagnosed OCD made for a lethal combination. I was bombarded with these intrusive thoughts, obsessions, and acting on these compulsions. It was terrible. I would have to drive around the block multiple times to make sure that I shut my garage door. And then I had this horrible feeling in my gut as I went over a bump in the road, and I thought that I had killed someone. So I had to drive around the block and come back and make sure that everything was okay. And then I absolutely couldn't leave my office without checking the 20 or so computers in our lab. And what's worse is I had to have another adult walk around with me to make sure they were off. You see, I was working in one of the most important buildings on a military installation. And I was scared to death that if I had a careless mistake, the building could be burned down, and a person that was a fireman person could possibly get hurt, and all these materials, sensitive items, would be lost. Oh my God, I was going crazy, and the whole world was watching. I just couldn't turn these things off in my head. So one evening, I decided to make some banana bars with cream cheese frosting, because doing things for other people makes you feel better. And I delivered my treats to all the elderly folks in my neighborhood. The next morning, I woke up with a huge panic attack. I was just sure that the cream cheese not being refrigerated was going to lead to deadly food poisoning. Oh my God, I was killing all the old people. I had to go to these little ladies in the neighborhood and tell them what I thought I had done. And they assured me that the sugar offset the dairy and the cream cheese. And you know what? Nobody got sick and nobody died from my banana bars. But I couldn't trust my brain. And it was around this time that Andrea Yates drowned her 5 precious children. And in my altered state of mind, I was afraid that I had the same problem. My husband was busy building a company 2 hours away. And I refused to stay at my own home with my 4-year-old son at night because I couldn't trust my brain. So I hired our teenage babysitter to sleep on my couch for all the times that I was alone. I distinctly remember sitting on my couch thinking, life is not worth living. Now, I had no plans to kill myself, but I did not want to be alive. I couldn't take my mind anymore. Well, since I was going to my doctor every morning for my shots before I would go to work, I was starting to tell him things, and I was telling him how I was feeling. And one day, he said to me, I believe that your OCD is what's causing your anxiety. And there it was. I was finally correctly diagnosed. Now, my doctor consulted with my maternal fetal medicine and my OBGYN, and they decided that medication for me far outweighed any dangerous effects to my unborn baby girl. The doctor started naming medications that I could start taking, and I said to him, no way. I said, those drugs sound like medications only freaks take. I was cool. I mean, I hid my embarrassing behavior really well, I thought. And what if one of my cool friends found out about this medication that I was taking? How was I kidding? How many times did I embarrass myself by acting on my compulsions? And I'm not sure how he did it, but he convinced me to take these medications. So by now, my house of sticks had been blown to pixie dust by the big bad wolf OCD. Now, it took weeks and months for the medication to start taking effect, but when it did gloriously, my life changed. When OCD wasn't overpowering my life on a daily basis, I could cope. You know what? The sun started shining again, and chocolate started tasting good, and the smell of roses was intoxicating. When our daughter was 4 months old, we made a big leap of faith, and we moved 2 hours out of our comfort zone. We left our home and we moved to the big city, we found our home, our forever home, in a cul-de-sac surrounded by wonderful people. And eventually, I got a position as a speech pathologist in the local school district. Now that was very scary because I had quit my job before, and I was really worried that a rare case would trigger my OCD. But now was the time to start building my house of brick. Every day that I didn't succumb to OCD was another brick in my house. And in time, it became the norm not to be bombarded with obtrusive thoughts, obsessions, and my compulsions. I was an overcomer. And sometimes I would walk into work and I would say to myself, if you only knew what I had overcome just to be here today. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that at some points, my OCD is triggered by stress. And in fact, sometimes whole sections of the bricks in my house fall. But here's the good news. It doesn't stay that way. I no longer succumb to all of the issues that OCD brought on me. Now, if you have heard these things and anything rings true to you, I encourage you to build your house of brick, and let's start tonight. Now, when I think about building a house, I think about clearing the land. And clearing the land consists of absolution. Give yourself and those in your environment absolution. OCD is a chemical imbalance, and it's no one's fault. Then you need to lay the foundation. And the foundation consists of self-love. Accept yourself for who you are and let go of the self-loathing and the embarrassment caused by acting on your compulsions. Now, the walls of your house, they'll be framed with help from professionals, such as a medical doctor or a psychiatrist, and they can guide you in your treatment. Then your house, the roof will stand tall, protecting you as you work your way through treatment. Then, day by day, as you overcome your OCD, you can add brick to your house. And pretty soon, your house will be impregnable, and nothing that the big bad wolf OCD blows your way will make it fall.